After my grandfather passed away, I felt like a ship lost at sea. His death hit me hard, and with my recent breakup from my girlfriend of 2 years, the world seemed emptier than ever. My grandmother was also struggling, so I decided to start attending church with her, hoping to find some meaning or at least a bit of peace. Walking into the small church where everyone knew each other, I felt both comforted and out of place. The familiar hymns and my grandmother's unwavering faith provided a soothing backdrop to my turmoil. I hoped that by being there, I might begin to navigate through my grief and confusion. One Sunday morning, as the congregation settled in, I noticed a new face among the familiar ones. A young woman with dark, curly hair and deep brown eyes sat quietly near the back. In our small New Hampshire town, new faces stood out, and hers was particularly striking. There was something enigmatic about her that caught my attention. After the service, my grandmother introduced us. "This is Elena," she said. Elena had recently moved to our town, escaping some family troubles, she mentioned vaguely. Despite her warm smile, there was a sadness in her eyes that mirrored my own feelings of loss. We exchanged phone numbers and social media contacts, and soon we were talking regularly. Our conversations flowed easily, and I found myself looking forward to hearing from her. She began to open up about her past, her abusive stepfather, and the dangers posed by her biological father that had driven her and her mother to relocate. Her vulnerability resonated deeply with me. As weeks went by, our connection grew stronger. Sharing our stories felt natural, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel so alone. Attending church became more than a routine. It became a place where I found a kindred spirit, someone who understood the weight I was carrying. When Elena agreed to go out with me, a spark of excitement flickered inside. We settled on a classic date, a movie followed by dinner at the local diner. The film was forgettable, but sitting next to her made it worthwhile. Her quiet laughter and the way she tucked her hair behind her ear caught my attention more than the scenes on the screen. Over dinner, the conversation flowed easily. I told her about the summers I spent fishing with my grandfather, how he'd wake me before dawn to catch the best light. She listened intently, her deep brown eyes never leaving mine. In return, she shared her love for painting and how it offered an escape from her troubled family life. After we finished eating, neither of us was ready to say goodnight. I suggested a drive through the countryside, and she agreed with a soft smile. The rural roads were peaceful, the trees arching overhead like a tunnel leading us into another world. The stars above were brighter than I'd seen in a long time. We talked about everything and nothing. The cool night air carried the scent of pine, and for the first time in months I felt a sense of contentment. The weight of my grandfather's passing and my recent breakup seemed to lift, if only for a moment. Suddenly, Elena grew quiet. I glanced over to see her eyes roll back, and she began speaking in a language I didn't recognize. Her voice was low and eerie, sending chills down my spine. Panic surged through me as I called her name, but she didn't respond. I pulled over, my hands trembling. Unsure of what to do, I reached out to touch her shoulder. Just as abruptly as it started, she stopped speaking and sat silently. Fear and confusion washed over me, and I knew something was terribly wrong. I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed for help. While I was trying to explain the situation to the operator, Elena suddenly became alert. She looked at me with a mix of fear and confusion in her eyes. Before I could say a word, she flung open the car door and dashed into the woods. "Elena!" I shouted, scrambling out of the car. I chased after her, but the dense trees and underbrush quickly swallowed her figure. The isolation of the area made it impossible to track her in the darkness. My calls echoed unanswered among the towering pines. The police and paramedics arrived shortly after. I led them to where I last saw her, but despite an extensive search, there was no trace of Elena. They questioned me thoroughly, their skepticism apparent. When I tried calling her number, a recorded voice told me it was no longer in service. Perplexed, I checked her social media profiles, only to find they had been deleted. It was as if she had never existed. Desperate, I reached out to a friend who had met her briefly. He attempted to contact her but encountered the same dead ends. The authorities began to doubt my story, and I could see the disbelief in their eyes. Days turned into weeks, and the mystery of Elena's disappearance consumed me. I replayed our conversations, trying to find some clue, but nothing made sense. The more I searched for answers, the more elusive they became. My nights were restless, filled with fragmented dreams and unanswered questions. My grandmother noticed the change in me. She suggested we pray together, but even the familiar comfort of church felt hollow. The strong faith that once guided me now seemed distant, overshadowed by uncertainty and doubt. I started to question not just what happened that night, but my own grasp on reality. In the end, I decided to leave town. The memories and unresolved feelings were too heavy to bear. As I drove away from the only home I had ever known, I wondered if I would ever find closure. The road ahead was unclear, but I hoped that somewhere along the way, I might make sense of everything that had happened.